My name is Yosry Barsoum. I'm a vice president here and the director of Center for Securing the Homeland, which includes two FFRDCs that we operate on behalf of the federal government, the Homeland Security System Engineering FFRDC and the National Cybersecurity FFRDC that we operate on behalf of NIST. So, we heard a lot of great discussion this morning around software, supply chain, some of the policy and mandate issues. And we thought in this afternoon session, of course, we heard from Bob Martin on the system of trust and the ability to assess risk in a consistent way. And this afternoon, we thought we'd tackle an easier issue, which is how we get CSCRIM institutionalized in the federal government. As you know, and as I said, I've been working for MITRE for 30 years, supporting federal government, and it's very, very hard to get something adopted within a single department. Getting it adopted across the federal space is a very difficult task. So, and with us today, we have two senior leaders in the government, in the federal government, and I'll let them introduce themselves. The first person, so I'll throw it to you to introduce yourself, Kanitra and Brian.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kanitra Tyler. I am the Information and Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management Service Element Lead. Say all of that.
5 times quick.
I took on this opportunity at NASA in 2017, late 2017, returning from maternity leave, where I was told, oh, you can mature this process for us. It'll be like raising 2 babies. It turned out I was raising 13 babies because with the 10 NASA centers and our FFRDC, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, everyone was doing something different. So it has definitely been an adventure. And as of late, my partner in crime here, Brian Paap, we've been doing a lot of great things together to help not only NASA, but all of our friends across the federal space, state and local government, as well as small businesses. And with that, I'll pass it over to Brian.
Okay, Brian Paap. I want to start off with one thing, Bob. When it comes to the end of time, don't give Yosry the finger, okay?
Yeah, give me something else.
You can give that, just not the finger, okay? Brian Paap, I work with CISA. I've been there for about 2.5 years now. Before that, I was with DoD over at the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, working supply chain and adding cybersecurity capabilities to satellite systems. So that was, to me, very interesting on a couple of fronts. With the supply chain aspect, it took on a different, kind of a different role than what I'm doing now. That was more specific to truly needing these parts that were built out of mom and pop shops, and how do we make sure that we get those over to where they need to be to perform the developing of those vehicles. But I'm really excited for what we're doing and the partnerships that we've gained over the last couple of years with Kanitra, with John Boynes at NIST, and many others, with DHS OCIO's office. So we've just kind of dug in together and started to figure out what all of this really means from an operational perspective. So I'll leave it there.
That's great. Kanitra, Brian, welcome. So just to kick things off, the cyber executive order was mentioned this morning multiple times. So I'll just quote a little bit of what it says, and I think that's pertinent to this discussion. It says that the federal government must take action to rapidly improve security and integrity of the supply chain. The how is now what we're going to talk about. What are the ways for the federal government to actually do that? You heard from Charles Clancy this morning and other panels that risk is a continuum. Mandating something like don't use Huawei or some other company. It's probably not the right way. That's a very blunt tool. So how do we help the federal government to really assess the risk? And like I said, that was a theme that was mentioned multiple times. What are the tools to illuminate? What are the tools to evaluate? How do we present that to decision makers so they can make better decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So I will first open up the session just to ask Kanitra, NASA has been sort of leading the charge on building a CSCRIM program. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Kanitra?
Sure. So I think Emily asked, well, what prompted NASA to do it? It was kind of one of those because Congress said so. As of fiscal year 2013, or since 2013, we have explicitly been called out in the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And honestly, for several years, it really was just a compliance, let's check the box. Yes, we did it. Now, in our more matured state, we are doing it as things to enable the mission, to protect our ecosystem, recognizing that what we are introducing into our environment can affect multiple things, including our partners that we are interconnected with. So this, again, it is definitely a challenge. It takes the entire village. And so right now at NASA, we yes, in the OCIO's organization, we are focusing on that cyber scrim. But as an enterprise, we are looking at scrim across the board. What does a holistic supply chain risk management program look like? And so for NASA, we have the OCIO's organization that performs scrim functions. We also have our Office of Safety and Mission Assurance who's performing scrim functions, albeit from a different lens. We have been called out in the Appropriations Act. They are acting under the requirements of the CFO Act. So they are actually doing those audits and those safety inspections and things of that nature. And what we're working to do as an agency is bring all of those parts and pieces together, letting everyone do what they are experts in, but having a single repository that is there for our leaders to take a look at and have that single snapshot of what is our risk posture as an agency, and then begin to drill down into our major missions, things like the Artemis portfolio, which includes several missions such as Gateway, SLS, and Orion. So again, it is a journey, not just for OCIO from a CSCRIM perspective, but for the entire agency to manage the risk at an enterprise level.
So Kanitra, just as a follow-up to that, as you transition from compliancy to assessing the risk, what are the lessons learned over the last 8 or 9 years that you could share with the group?
Definitely one, like I said, it takes a village. It should not be done in a silo, and part of that village includes your partners. You have to have the conversations with industry. I was just talking to Emil saying, we're coming up with these questionnaires, we're coming up with things that we need to know. And of course, the question is, well, why do you need to know that? And then what are you going to do with it? So the lesson is communicate, 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 build those relationships. And then as far as another lesson that we learned kind of the hard way was don't go out and purchase a tool. Actually build your program and then find a tool that is going to enable or facilitate your program.
That's great. Brian, I'll ask you a similar question. How did DHS start down the CSCRIM road?
It's kind of an interesting story. So from a CISA perspective, it was more like hand waving. We've got this CSCRIM thing. Can you go do this thing? And honestly, I just built on a lot of the work that Emil had started, which was really good, foundationally sound. Worked a lot with MITRE on determining, what makes sense. Starting up a CyberSig, which was a forum of experts across the federal government in this area. Expert I use that term loosely because there are very few experts in this area across the federal government, and that's one of the biggest challenges that we've seen. But we're trying to fix that. So just building that community of interest and getting everybody together to talk about what makes sense, taking the great work that NIST had done with 161 and other related documents, so we can bring that back to the group and say, you know, what makes sense for a CSCRIM program? What do you think that we should pull out of this and say, yes, it applies to what we need to do? Right? Everybody has a different mission, right? So there may be some give and take, but what does that middle ground look like, right? So we did a lot of that work with our partners, especially Kanitra, being leading the way. She'll never tell you that she's leading the way. But we've got a really good set of what we believe is a good start for developing and sustaining a CSCRIM program. And that's based on the 161 guidance that we have out there, which to me is a what. You know, and talking to John Boynes quite a bit, you know, he said, you know, we've got all of this detail, all this information. Now CISA needs to do something with it. So we started putting all of that together, turning the what into the how. So how does this information that NIST provided impact me? You know, what do I do with it? How do I implement it? And do I need to consider rules before tools, right? Do I need to build that strategy and roadmap before I go out and take a look at what vendors have?
So just pulling on that thread, Brian, how are you socializing that with the DNAs? How are you getting the DNAs to sort of adopt the how, if you will?
So we had a pilot. It's called the proof of value pilot. We had 4 non-CFO, you're not CFO Act, right? You are. Okay, my bad. 4 CFO Act agencies. 2 others came on towards the end of the pilot, and we really learned from them, right? How to put all of this stuff together, what really impacts them in their organization, where they currently are. Because I can't look at Kanitra and say, start at page 1 when she's at 75.
Right.
So going through that process first and having educational series around the steps to do that really helped us to refine what we have and push everybody else along. So what are we doing now? In the fall, we're going to be having educational series based on what we've learned through the proof of value pilot and start educating more departments and agencies. Now, this may be something that we can record and put on YouTube, or it might be that we get as many people in the room as possible to send that message about here's what you need to do to start. Because to be honest, many departments and agencies, they are just coming out of the womb, right? Their staffing is like 2 people. One department has a 0.25 person to do this. So to me, that's unacceptable. So there's work to be done there with OMB and articulating the need. So Security Act 2018 said, you know, CFO Act agencies, you need to stand up a CSCRIM program. Has anybody thought about funding and resources around that? No, not really. But we're helping with that. We've built out funding charts, resource charts, templated strategic plans, templated roadmaps to get people at least moving in the right direction.
So pulling on that a little bit more, and maybe this is a venue where people could help. What can people do to help? You know, accelerate, and I'll open it to both of you. Given your experience, Kanitra, you know, this is, as you said, it's going to take a village, and I'm assuming the village is not just inside the department or agency, but broadly across the nation.
It kind of is. It's both, right? Because you have organizations that are hyper-federated. Trouble there is getting it down. So say you have Treasury. Within Treasury, you have IRS, who is the 800-pound gorilla.
Sure.
How are you from that level going to tell them, right, what to do? So Kanitra did a great job of doing this within NASA. So I'll let you talk about that.
like, how you get it done is that the head of the agency basically says you will get it done. And so what can you do to help? So if there's someone from OMB, show me the money. Give us some jingles, help us out here. We want to do the right thing. We're trying to do the right thing. But, the fact of the matter is, when we don't have the resources, no matter how hard we want to do the right thing, it's a little hard to get blood from a turnip, as my grandma would say. Um, so it's and the other thing is continuing these types of discussions where it's a partnership, and there's a collaboration that's happening. So whereas I may have a team of 12 and someone else only has two, it's about sharing the wealth that we do have, spreading the resources. Um, where we are strong, someone else may be weak, so we help them along, where even if they have that 0.25 person, they may be very well versed in an area that 0.25 is like having 25. So it's leveraging the resources and the expertise that's available across the board, both within your agency and then outside of your agency.
Right. We have learning initiatives that we've started around vendor illumination, around software verification and validation, because 2209 talks about application security testing. So what does that look like? I don't know, but we're going to try and figure that out. And I think that's from a supply chain perspective as well. But the forums that we have out there, we've developed them together. We have the CSCRIM ACOP, which is the Acquisition Community of Practice. That's a Fed space only. And we talk about a lot of the hard problems, things that we face every day. What does risk management look like within your organization? So we've had Cody over at NASA come in and talk about the FAIR methodology and how that helps their mission based on what they're doing, right? And then there's also working with academia and the industry base. We can't forget that, because we can do things in a vacuum. Sometimes the federal government is bad at that, right? We just do things and we tell industry to go do. But we really need to start gaining more of their buy-in, because they've got a lot to offer, right? We don't want to tell them to do something, next thing you know, we're paying double, right? Or it's something that they actually can't deliver on. So we've started working with the ACT-IAC. We've got a couple of initiatives going on with them. We've got one around challenges in this CSCRIM space that industry faces, and the other one is government policy and how that impacts industry.
That's great. So, Kanitra, you mentioned, top-down advocacy is very important from these agencies. Obviously, resources are very important, both financial resources and human resources. Talk a little bit about, how long did it really take to institutionalize, even with those kind of ingredients in place? How long does it take, and what are the measuring stick? How do you know that you've arrived? Is there inch stones or milestones that you could sort of point to give you a sense that things are on the right track?
So certainly the IG audit report was helpful. And I will say, a lot of people say, oh, these GAO reports, that doggone IG, they are actually your friends. Those reports help drive action. It helps get resources. So one, it was definitely, sitting back and taking a look at what I had to work with. Digesting that report, and it didn't take much. My strongest advocate, who is the champion, is our Deputy CIO for Cybersecurity and Privacy, Mike Witt. And he basically says, "Oh, I'm just going to hold your purse. You tell me what you need, and I'm going to hold your purse and give it to you." We are not done yet. We are still getting there. One of the things that in the corporate environment at NASA, or that institutional environment, it was very easy because they were using, basic administrative tools. The difficulty was at one point, specialized flight hardware and software was exempt, which made absolutely no sense. And so the IG said, no, 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 you need to remove that exemption. So the biggest paradigm shift was getting these projects and missions to understand you cannot just go. I understand ISS is extremely important, which is why you cannot just go out and buy components to attach to it. So that was definitely a struggle. We are still struggling. However, again, getting that leadership buy-in, up to the point of our deputy administrator, Bob Cabana, recently chartered a supply chain security working group, which is intended to bridge that gap between the institutional and the mission space. Um, I was asked to chair that. So once again, I now have a collection of different children within the mission space and all of the various functional areas, trying to get us all to understand that we are the village elders, and we need to take care of the village. So again, it is definitely a journey. It is not something that's going to change overnight, and it takes a lot of patience. And I'm just going to be transparent, and a lot of tequila.
Yeah, how do you know that you're making progress?
So the initially the measuring stick was the number of complaints that Mike was not getting anymore. Now the measuring stick is how many program and project and mission managers are actually coming to me to say, how do I navigate this process? How can we do this more proactively and engage one another? So I think the customer satisfaction is definitely one, and or lack thereof with the customer complaints.
That's great. So, Brian, I'll ask you this one. As you look forward, institutionalizing CSCRIM across the federal civilian executive branch, what are the plans?
A lot of training. um, like I said before, the pool is very shallow, right? You've got a few in this room that are top CSCRIM experts, right? But it's not like you can become an expert overnight on this stuff, right? So we're looking at pulling training together that will follow a methodology based on what we've already developed through the POV pilot and the assistance of our partners in that pilot, and turning that into digital badges that everybody can have. But this is a multi-year effort. We're going to initiate it with educational seminars over the fall, and we'll get a lot of lessons learned from that. And I think from that will drive a lot of the training that we put together, because I think it's really cool to have some type of digital badge that you can say, I am a this level scrimsme. What else?
Do you want to be a black belt C-Scrim?
I do. Third degree.
And Kanitra, training was one of the questions. What is that something that NASA has piloted, instituted? How do you grow sort of organic talent to help the program thrive?
Honestly, it's been a lot of on-the-job training. We did take the APICS Certified Supply Chain Professional, and it was not C-Scrim. Let me just tell you, the bullwhip effect, we were all like, what? So we did not, or I did not sit for that exam because it would be futile. But it's really a matter of seeing what those pain points are, and then Google is our friend. We go out and we do Google searches and just try to pull things together to answer the question or to ease that pain point at the time. But as Brian said, there's nothing really available that, oh, go to this particular learning track for CSCRIM. So it's just, the webinars and things that our industry partners, put on that really have been the guiding post. But it's just, learning from our mistakes. We fall, we get up, we brush ourselves off, and we learn from that mistake. It's like, don't do that again. And that has been pretty much the educational model.
And it's not just the C-SCRIM person that needs the training. It's the acquisition person that needs the training around what C-SCRIM really means to them. Risk management, cybersecurity, the PMO when they're developing requirements, what does that mean? So it's a lot of different roles and responsibilities that we have to account for, and maybe we account for that some type of C-SCRIM steward type role. But more to come on the training element.
I almost feel like there needs to be something akin to like the 85-70, where it says if you're in this role at this level, you need to have this type of training or complete these types of courses. But first, we need to get the courses and the content developed before we start to develop sort of a curriculum that gets you to those badges.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps that's a role for academia,
Okay. I think in this role, academia falls behind. I think we need to step forward. This is one of those opportunities that rarely happens, where we start carving the path for academia and then engage academia so they can then start developing the curriculum based on what is provided to them.
That's great. So I'll just shift a little bit as you look forward to the next phase, Kanitra, in the program. What are the biggest challenges? You have advocacy, you have resources. Seems that you've achieved certain milestones in terms of people coming to you and programs coming to you for advice. What do you see as the next set of challenges to overcome?
So, despite it saying securing the software supply chain, Section 4 of the EO is really about software asset management until we get to that SBOM. Then we start talking about supply chain. So that is a challenge right now because it says supply chain. WIT said, oh yeah, that's Kanitra. Give it to Kanitra. Let her do it. And then it was like, well, no, it's not really. And then it's like, well, if you want it done right, just let Kanitra do it. So that's a challenge. And just the last 2 days, we actually had a workshop where we are now, so we have 12,000 unique suppliers in our environment. About 50% of those are, one-offs. We get one thing from them. But the other 6,000, we now want to do that criticality analysis. So we spent a lot of time with Chris and Emily this week really talking about how are we going to do that criticality analysis? How are we going to identify at what tier that supplier resides? And that is going to be a lengthy process. And then we are also, right now we have 2 processes in place, the CAT scan, covered article and technology supply chain assessment needed, which then gets you to the ACL, the assessed and cleared list. Where we are moving to is the proactive supplier engagement process, where it's a questionnaire, Emil, I'm sorry. But it's really focusing in on, tell us what your supply chain risk management practices are. Tell us who your suppliers are. More importantly, tell us all of the products and services you want us to consider for inclusion in what we will now call the top shelf. Total operational provisioning of software and hardware evaluated for life cycle fulfillment. Yes, we do acronyms very well.
They're competing with DoD.
So the challenge there is going to be, making sure that our industry partners are willing to come to the table and complete that questionnaire. And then, some of our missions are going to think, oh, because I'm in the Artemis portfolio, everything I have is critical. Well, no, it's critical to you, but from an enterprise perspective, we really need to get that criticality defined for the overall enterprise.
So what would help you from a CISA perspective? That's OMB. What would you like CISA to do that may take something off your plate that you then don't have to account for anymore?
So I'm told that CISA is going to have the authoritative repository for the SBOMs. I'm told that CISA is going to provide all of these resources. So I just want CISA to do what CISA said they're going to do.
And Brian, that gets us into what are your biggest challenges going forward? It seems like
Resources and funding.
but in terms of capabilities,
Um,
Kanitra mentioned a few. Um,
yeah,
what
I
are the biggest hurdles?
probably myself, because I tend to move too fast and get my hand slapped a little bit. But that's only because I can see the light. I see how we're moving forward and see how we can start accomplishing these issues that we keep hearing through listening sessions, through engagements with our federal partners out there. I need this. I need that contract language that says this and that, right? What do I do with an SBOM? I mean, Alan has, the bigger technical piece of it, but then I've got the other piece, which is, what do I do with this thing? So we're trying to figure all of that stuff out too. So there's a lot of struggles, but it's just one piece at a time. As long as we continue to listen to our partners and the struggles that they continue to have, we'll start to attack those pieces like vendor illumination, software V&V, contract language and requirements. That's a big piece of it as well, because we haven't seen the new FAR language come out yet, but I heard is pretty intensive, so that's a very good thing. Then we just need to look at that and consider what gaps may be coming from what is not in there based on what's coming down the road, like AI and ML. So a lot of work. It's a job for life.
Job security for sure.
Yeah.
Let me just, switch. You heard this morning a lot about SBOM, and you mentioned it just now. Anything you want to comment about the benefits, how we should do it? I know, Brian, you said, and Kanitra as well, that's the next thing about evaluating the 6,000 critical software that you have in the enterprise. And Brian, you mentioned, well, once we get that, what do we do with it? How do you evaluate it? What's the goodness? Care to comment on the benefit and what's missing?
Okay.
A good idea, bad idea?
Yeah,
Here's the
I
things
mean,
that are needed.
I think that there's quite a bit of work around SBOM right now. You're starting to see industry pop up left and right with SBOM capabilities. I got an email today from another company that just started doing SBOMs. I know the company didn't know that they did that though. But what we're missing from this, from the tools or capabilities that are out there right now is what I do with this. What is my role in this? I mean, you can get a vulnerability report on an SBOM and identify, risks and dependencies. You can have critical vulnerabilities, but what does that mean to the receiver, and how do I act upon that? Let's take a look at the most critical aspect of that assessment and say, these are the suggested acts. You should act on these things, communicate with the vendor and say, these things are not acceptable, go back, and then come back when it's prepared, when it's complete. They can make that assessment if they want to do that or not, but at least there's some type of forward-leaning guidance there for the agencies to act on when they're engaging with industry, right? But then you have the internal aspect. What does it mean to legal whenever you get an SBOM? If there's a licensing issue, what do you do? A lot of these people don't know that they have a role in this, or that they need to know, why they need to know it, how it can help them from a cybersecurity perspective. Say you have a SolarWinds event, right? Or a Log4j event. Why would the incident responders need to know about that SBOM, or even take a look at it and evaluate it? Okay, Well, all right, I see that that code's in there. So, and it was identified as a vulnerability for the last 350 days. So we're building out the benefits for the agencies and trying to articulate it in such a way that they can transcribe that to leadership as to why they need to have that information, and for them to think, okay, this is why it's important to me. If I'm at acquisitions, right? This is why I need that information. But not only that, we're working on the vendor aspect of this as well. Why it benefits the vendor to provide this SBOM to the acquirer, okay? Because the vendor is looking at this going, well, why do you need it? Never really asked about it before, but why do you need it? So I think it's gonna be very important for us to articulate both sides and share that out. That way, everybody's on the same page as to why it's important for these 7 people in my organization to know about this, and why vendors, maybe spur vendors to want to share the SBOM information.
So you said a lot about SBOM, so I'll just pull the thread of, yes, there's a lot of great work that Alan and his team are doing with SBOM, but then there's also the ICT SCRIM task force that's has a work stream looking at HBOMs. So at some point we need to get to, I forget the young lady's name, but the concept of an XBOM. It's just a bill of materials. It's everything, whatever it is, because that laptop that John is using, it came with some embedded software. So let's just account for the total device. And I'll leave it at that. We just need it. We need to know what is being delivered to us, not just that final transform device, but we need to know all of the components of that device, especially the likelihood of counterfeit and tainted is increasing more and more. So we need to know what's supposed to be there, and that would then enable that verification and validation upon receipt.
So you need that FBOM as well, right?
Or the thing, no. No, it's great. The everything bomb. Because again, you know, software is not the only vulnerability. It's not the only attack vector or set of attack vectors. You got to look at the hardware, the OT components. If there's OT, I imagine NASA has a lot of OT components, not just IT components. So expanding that is very critical. Before I turn it to questions in the audience, is there anything that we didn't ask that you want to share with the group? Good. So any questions online?
Yeah, we have one fairly basic question to Kanitra would be, does NASA have both a SCRIM and a CSCRIM plan? And there's the remark that sometimes these things are used interchangeably.
So what we have is called NASA's Strategic Approach to Information and Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management. We then have an IT security handbook. So the policy structure is basically the NASA Procedural Directive, the NPD, the NASA Procedural Requirement, the NPR, and then, so for our NPR 2810, which are the security requirements, that is the requirement. We then have handbooks that drill down into how those requirements are being met. So we also have the IT security handbook for supply chain, and then the analysts have a document, which is the SOP, that goes into how we are performing our functions to implement the steps detailed in that handbook.
Okay. The next question looks at, or seems to imply that there are common elements of SCRIM that cross all departments and agencies that would be important for the foundation for information sharing and best practices. But as you've already discussed earlier, that's not that common across the departments and agencies. So are there a set of KPIs or templates to help programs report on this capability and progress in their SCRIM efforts? So common practices across all the FSEB. Nope.
John?
Please.
Oh,
In here, Don Davidson here now with Synopsys. When I was in DoD CIO, John Boyens and I worked together to write CNSS Directive 505 for national security systems. And we tried to make that more of a measure or metric standard in the fact that the directive would then require agencies to report on how well they'd done in the process.
mhm.
That was not generally well accepted and a lot of pushback. But I think that's still of value. So you could take 161, which is unlike many NIST standards, is not just an advisory pub, it's mandated by OMB that all federal agencies have to have some sort of scrim plan. So there actually is some work in the past that has said we need a metric and we need a way to measure this going forward. So there is some work there.
So 161 is a beefy document. If you dig down a little bit, we do talk about metrics and measurement in terms of measuring a program. We conceptually, we talk about developing it. And okay, so I'll start with 161 version 2015. We use Scrim Plan for 3 different levels. Right, we talked about different types of scrim plans, one at a tier 1 strategic level, one more at a mission programmatic level, another one at an operational. Clearly that caused lots of confusion using the same term for 3 different types. So with the revision we just put out, we've layered it so that the top part is a strategy and implementation plan at a kind of an executive tier 1 level. The more programmatic, that funnels down into also a tier, kind of a tier 2, can also have a strategy which is based off the organizational strategy. But then you have policies in there. And with all of these, we offer different templates to help organizations get started. We never did this in the past because I think organizations have a tendency to copy and paste, and that's not, a risk-based approach. But nonetheless, when we did our research before developing a pub, that's what lots of departments and agencies were asking for, right? They wanted, how do we get started? So we provided those. If there are gaps in what we put in there, let us know. But other than that, a lot of that stuff is down in there. You just need to dig a little deeper.
So I think that's more from a higher level, John, right? From a higher level evaluation. So they're talking about measures, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like higher level or what? Talk about measuring a
Well,
program.
yeah. So I'm thinking from the capability perspective.
In terms of what? I mean, so we are lacking, organizations lack lots of capabilities that guys talked about.
Mhm.
In terms of a programmatic operational perspective, that should be starting from a program management office and filtering down out the organization to different levels.
Great thing to talk about it first.
Yeah, absolutely. In closing, I just want to thank Kanitra and Brian for your passion, your leadership. It certainly is very well needed in this area. So thank you both.